The red light above the camera glows hot, pulsing like a heartbeat. The host's voice trembles slightly, trying to wrangle the chaos. But Patel's words slice through the air sharp, clipped, and condescending. She leans forward, gesturing wide, the perfect image of confidence. Every syllable drips superiority, her smile practiced for millions watching live. Across the table, Jasmine Crockett sits still, her posture calm, her eyes steady. She's been here before on the receiving end of arrogance disguised as intellect. Patel talks over her again, dismissing a point mid-sentence with a chuckle that feels rehearsed. The crowd murmurs. The tension hums. Crockett's hands rest quietly on the table, but her silence carries weight. Congresswoman. With all due respect, Patel begins, her voice coated with sugar and steel. Crockett tilts her head. Respect? She repeats softly, almost to herself. Then she leans in, gaze locked. The room narrows around her voice. Tell me something, Crockett says, her tone smooth but piercing. If accountability only applies to others, what does that make you? For a second, the air goes still. The lights feel hotter. A producer glances up from behind the camera. Patel blinks once, twice, caught between reflex and realization. Her lips part, but no sound comes out. The silence is louder than any argument that came before it. The host shifts in his seat, unsure whether to intervene or let it breathe. The audience watches, suspended. In those few seconds, Patel's smirk falters, the performance crumbles. She looks for footing that isn't there. Crockett's expression doesn't change. She's not gloating, just waiting. And the cameras, merciless as ever, capture it all, across millions of screens. That pause stretches 5 seconds, maybe 10, but it feels eternal. A flash of disbelief crosses Patel's face, then something else, fear. She swallows, eyes darting toward the host, toward the clock, anywhere but the question. That's when the clip will be replayed in slow motion. Shared. Memed. Immortalized. The freeze wasn't technical, it was human. And as the tension thickens, Crockett exhales softly, almost whispering, "We can wait for your answer." The studio stays silent. The nation holds its breath. But to understand why that question hit so hard, we have to go back to where this tension began. Asterisk, just hours before the freeze heard around the internet, the studio was buzzing with its usual rhythm makeup brushes, coffee cups, nervous laughter echoing behind the curtain. It was supposed to be a standard segment, another neatly packaged debate about accountability and leadership. But something about the lineup felt combustible. At one end of the panel sat Patel, the conservative firebrand who had made a career out of cutting people off mid-sentence. She was good television, sharp, quick, a master of timing. She thrived on chaos, on the art of looking composed while making others stumble. The producers loved her for it. Ratings did. Across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, Democratic Congresswoman, lawyer, and public defender turned political force. She'd flown in from D.C. that morning, hair still pinned from a long committee hearing. The crew greeted her with courtesy, but behind the politeness was calculation. They knew Patel would come swinging, and they wanted the clash. Crockett knew it too, but she didn't flinch. When the cameras rolled, Patel took the first shot. "The real issue," she said with a practiced smirk, "is that people talk about accountability until it's their side under fire." The line earned a few chuckles from the studio audience. She leaned back, satisfied. Crockett didn't interrupt. She didn't even blink. She let Patel finish, watching her like a chess player studying an opening move. When it was her turn to speak, her voice was calm. "Accountability," she said, "shouldn't depend on whose side we're on. Otherwise, it's not accountability, it's theater." A subtle shift rippled through the room. Patel smirked again, but her eyes flickered just briefly. She was used to opponents who fought back with volume, not with poise. Viewers at home wouldn't yet realize what was coming, but the tension was already seated. Because this wasn't just a debate between two women, it was a collision of philosophies. Patel stood for the performance of certainty, the comfort of control. Crockett embodied something quieter but infinitely more dangerous, authenticity. In Patel's world, dominance meant speaking over others until your voice became the only sound left. In Crockett's world, power meant patience, the discipline to wait until arrogance exposed itself. Producers exchanged glances behind the glass. They could feel the shift too. It was subtle, like watching a tide turn. Patel kept pushing. "With all due respect, Congresswoman, people are tired of politicians pretending they care about truth when it's convenient." Crockett smiled, small, deliberate. "Then they'll love what's coming next," she replied. That wasn't a retort. It was a warning. The audience didn't clap. They didn't need to. Something in her tone said the real conversation hadn't even begun. Meanwhile, the country outside the studio was a powder keg. Online, tempers flared daily over accountability, power, and privilege. Viewers tuned in not for clarity but for conflict. The show promised it, but they were about to get something else entirely, a reckoning. This wasn't just punditry, it was performance meeting purpose. One side performing outrage, the other waiting with truth like a loaded question. And soon, that question would find its mark. Because Patel had built her career on talking over opponents. But this time, her voice would fail her not because she was silenced, but because she was seen. Crockett adjusted her mic, eyes steady on her opponent. Her calm was unnerving. It wasn't indifference, it was readiness. She'd faced louder voices before. But this time, the cameras wouldn't save her. Asterisk before the freeze. Before the silence that echoed across the country, Patel was untouchable. Or at least, that's how it looked. She was television's darling combatant, the kind of guest producers booked when they wanted guaranteed sparks. Articulate, camera-ready, armed with statistics and smirks. Her brand was confidence, and she wore it like armor. Each appearance was a performance, and she'd long mastered her role, the immovable pundit who never lost her cool, and never lost a fight. In early clips, she sits beneath glowing studio banners, America at a crossroads, the future of leadership, always the loudest calm in the room. A host tries to redirect. She talks through him. A rival panelist tries to add context. She cuts them off, smiling. The audience laughs because she makes it look easy. One moment in particular had gone viral 2 years earlier. Patel interrupting a state senator mid-sentence with a perfectly timed quip. "If you're done reciting your feelings, maybe we can discuss facts." The line trended within minutes. Comment sections filled with applause emojis and one-liners calling her the savage queen of logic. She retweeted them all. But behind the highlight reels was a pattern. Patel didn't debate to understand. She debated to dominate. She learned that control on television wasn't about truth, it was about tempo. Whoever spoke faster, sharper, louder won by default. It wasn't conversation. It was choreography. And the choreography paid well. The networks rewarded her efficiency. She could end a segment with a viral quote and a smirk that sold that space. Her inbox overflowed with invitations, speaking gigs, podcasts, political galas. Soon, she wasn't just a guest, she was a brand. Her followers adored her for being fearless, unapologetic, and woke. They didn't see condescension. They saw courage. Every interruption, every deflection became proof of her strength. When critics called her arrogant, she framed it as persecution. When guests walked off set, she claimed victory. The internet rewarded her not for being right, but for being relentless. Yet off camera, something else lurked. Producers whispered about her rehearsals, how she'd spend hours perfecting tone and phrasing. She'd watch old clips obsessively, studying which smirk landed best, which phrases got the biggest engagement spikes online. Once, after a segment that fell flat, she reportedly told a colleague, "If they're not mad, they're not watching." That was Patel's unspoken creed. Outrage is oxygen. Every debate was an algorithmic gamble: feed the machine with friction, and it'll feed you fame. But even she knew there was a difference between control and conviction. In quieter moments off camera, backstage, makeup half done there, were flickers of something less rehearsed. Assistants caught her checking trending tabs mid-commercial break, frowning when the spotlight shifted elsewhere. Attention wasn't just validation, it was survival. And so the performance grew louder, her posture stiffer, her smile sharper. Each appearance became a test to prove she still owned the room. Then came the invitations that turned her into a symbol. Conservative panels started treating her as the intellectual counterweight to progressive chaos. Her soundbites became talking points. Her confidence, once natural, became performative necessity. The higher she climbed, the more brittle it felt beneath her. There was a moment that never made the airwaves, a clip buried in network archives. During a break, she muttered under her breath, "They don't care what I say. They just want the show." The camera kept rolling. Her co-host laughed it off. She did in single quotes. By the time she sat across from Jasmine Crockett, Patel wasn't just defending her views, she was defending her identity. Every smirk, every interruption, every flick of her hand carried years of conditioning. Stay on a fence, never concede, never look unsure. But arrogance is fragile when it depends on applause. And Crockett, with her silence and steady gaze, offered none. In that studio, Patel didn't realize she was walking into something different. She thought it would be another round of verbal gymnastics, another moment to show dominance. She'd faced professors, journalists, senators, activists, and always walked away the winner. But Crockett wasn't playing for soundbites. She was playing for truth. For Patel, truth was something to manage. For Crockett, it was something to reveal. That's why this moment would matter so much. Because Patel's greatest skill, control, was about to collide with someone who didn't need to wrestle for it. And deep down, maybe Patel sensed it. Maybe that's why, just seconds before going live, she adjusted her mic 3 times, checked her notes twice, and whispered to herself, Stay sharp. But control isn't strength when it's rooted in fear. And fear, no matter how well disguised, has a way of surfacing when the world finally stops applauding. Soon. It would. Long before Jasmine Crockett faced television lights and viral moments. She stood in courtrooms where the stakes weren't reputations, they were lives. Her voice wasn't amplified by microphones back then. It carried through echoing hallways at midnight, over files stacked higher than her desk. She was a public defender, one of the few willing to take the cases no one else wanted, the ones that didn't make headlines. Only heartbreak. Her clients weren't polished or powerful. They were tired single mothers, teenagers written off as trouble, workers who'd missed too many shifts and gotten caught in the wrong place. Crockett fought for them because no one else would. She learned to speak clearly, not loudly, to make people listen without demanding attention. She used to say to her colleagues, "When you fought for real people, TV arguments feel small." It wasn't arrogance. It was perspective, the kind born from fighting systems built to ignore the powerless. In those years, her calm wasn't natural. It was survival. Judges interrupted, prosecutors sneered, clients cried. She learned that anger might be justified, but control wins cases. So she mastered composure, not because she was unshakable, but because she had no choice. When she stepped into politics, that same control followed her. She wasn't the loudest in the room, but people noticed when she spoke. Reporters described her as measured. Opponents called her calculating. But to those who knew her, she was neither. She was focused. She'd seen too much to mistake volume for strength. The first time a talk show host tried to bait her into shouting, she smiled and said, "I don't raise my voice. I raise my standard." The clip didn't go viral, not yet, but it captured who she was. Crockett's path to Congress wasn't built on backroom deals or inherited networks. It was grit. Nights spent reading policy drafts under flickering fluorescent lights. Early mornings knocking on doors in neighborhoods forgotten by campaigns. She wasn't polished. She was grounded. When she spoke about justice, it wasn't theory. It was memory. Her campaign slogan had been simple: truth doesn't shout, it stands. It was a quiet rebellion against the political noise machine that rewarded outrage over honesty. People connected to it, especially those who felt unseen. Immigrants, working mothers, first-generation students, they saw themselves in her restraint, her dignity, her refusal to perform rage just to be heard. That's what made her dangerous to figures like Patel. Because Crockett didn't play the same game. She wasn't chasing applause or approval. She was chasing clarity. And when clarity enters a room built on performance, it unsettles everything. Her first few media appearances were awkward. Producers told her she needed to punch up her delivery, to sell emotion. She listened, nodded, then went on camera and spoke exactly as she always did, calm, steady, deliberate. They said it wouldn't work, but the numbers told a different story. Viewers weren't turning away. They were leaning in. There was something magnetic about watching a woman refuse to be rattled. Something revolutionary in seeing someone stay soft-spoken in a world addicted to noise. Behind the scenes, though, Crockett carried memories that shaped every pause, every breath. She remembered sitting beside a client who couldn't afford bail, watching the system grind on without mercy. She remembered mothers clutching photos of their sons, asking if she believed in miracles. Those moments carved something deep inside her, a sense that real power wasn't in overpowering others, but in refusing to become them. So, when she sat across from Patel that day, she didn't see an opponent to crush. She saw a performance, one she'd seen 1,000 times before. In courtrooms and boardrooms and committee hearings, people mistaking noise for conviction, people confusing dominance with leadership, and she knew how to handle it. Because Crockett's strength didn't come from talking over others. It came from letting silence do the work. She'd learned that the quiet after truth lands can shake a room more than any outburst ever could. Her team warned her before the show. Patel's aggressive. She'll interrupt. She'll talk over you. She'll push. Crockett just smiled. Then I'll let her, she said. The more she talks, the more she'll show. That calm wasn't strategy. It was principle. She believed in letting arrogance self-destruct, and she trusted her composure to make it happen. Moments before the segment began, she adjusted her blazer, glanced at the script, then set it aside. I don't need lines, she told her aide. I just need truth. The lights came up. Patel started talking, loudly, passionately, predictably, and Crockett sat there, letting her. Every interruption, every smirk, every talking point only confirmed what she already knew. Some people fight to be heard, others fight to be right. She waited for her opening. Patient as always. Not for the applause line, but for the moment arrogance crosses into absurdity. When bluster starts to sound like fear. And when it came, she was ready. Because to Crockett, This wasn't a battle of personalities. It was a mirror held up to a nation still deciding what kind of voice it wanted to believe in. The one that shouted, or the one that stood its ground. And as Patel spoke faster, louder, more desperate to dominate the frame, Crockett simply watched her, calm, collected, unshaken. She didn't need to win the argument in that moment. She just needed to wait for truth to reveal itself. Soon, it would. The moment the segment began, Patel took command of the air. Her voice cut through the studio like a knife, sharp, fast, relentless. She gestured with confidence, fingers slicing through the air as if her opinion were the only truth worth hearing. The topic was accountability, but to Patel it was performance. Every sentence was a jab, every pause a pose. She interrupted, corrected, dismissed, a symphony of self-assurance. Across from her, Jasmine Crockett sat still. One hand rested lightly on the table, the other clasped around a pen she hadn't used once. Her eyes didn't wander. They stayed fixed, not on Patel's mouth, but on her meaning, or the lack of it. The contrast was almost cinematic. Patel all motion and noise, Crockett all silence and gravity. As Patel rolled through talking points about personal responsibility, the subtext was clear, coded language aimed at the usual targets. She smiled thinly as she said it, glancing toward Crockett as if daring her to react. The audience sensed it. Viewers at home felt it. That tension, the kind you can't edit, the kind that grows when one person mistakes calm for weakness. Let's be honest, Patel said, laughing lightly. Some people just don't want to be held accountable. They blame the system instead of taking control of their lives. Crockett tilted her head, expression unreadable. Patel kept going, faster now, sensing victory. We can't keep excusing bad decisions and calling it oppression. At some point, people need to look in the mirror. She didn't get to finish. Crockett leaned forward, her voice even, her timing flawless. You mean like politicians who blame entire communities instead of examining the systems that failed them? The words weren't loud, but they landed. Patel froze mid-breath, her practiced rhythm shattered. A quiet gasp rippled through the studio. Even the moderator, who'd been content to let Patel dominate, glanced between them, unsure whether to intervene. Crockett didn't press. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just waited, giving Patel the same space Patel had never given her. Patel blinked, recovered. Forced a laugh. That's not what I meant, she said, waving a hand, but the charm was gone. The performance had cracked. You're twisting my words. Crockett's reply came soft, deliberate. I'm clarifying them. Silence again. The kind that hums. Patel tried to fill it. She always did. Look, Jasmine, we can't just keep. Crockett raised a finger, not to silence her, but to pause her. You've talked for 6 minutes. Let me give you one truth to sit with. She leaned slightly forward, her tone surgical. Accountability isn't just for the powerless. It's for the people who build the systems that make others powerless. The air thickened. You could feel every camera tilt, every producer leaning closer behind the glass. Patel opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was no snarky pivot this time, no laugh track to rescue her. And then something subtle shifted. The audience, which had been split moments earlier, began to turn. They weren't cheering. They were listening. Patel forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. That's a nice slogan, she said, voice slightly higher. Crockett didn't move. It's not a slogan. It's the job. That line lingered in the air like static. The room seemed to shrink around them. Patel glanced toward the moderator again, but he stayed silent. For the first time, she was off script, and it showed. Crockett leaned back now, the picture of control. The silence wasn't empty. It was power reclaimed. Somewhere in the control room, a producer whispered, "Hold the shot." They knew. They were watching a shift in real time. The practiced debater had just met the immovable calm she couldn't out-talk. Patel laughed again. Brittle this time. You're good at this, she said, a trace of bitterness curling beneath the compliment. Crockett smiled faintly. No. I'm just not afraid of silence. And that was the moment. The one that would loop endlessly online, replayed, remixed, reinterpreted. Because it wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a study in contrast. Noise versus composure. Ego versus purpose. The audience could feel it. The tide turning, not through confrontation, but through the unbearable weight of truth calmly spoken. Patel kept talking after that, of course. But it didn't matter. Because from the moment Crockett spoke, the conversation no longer belonged to Patel. It belonged to the silence that followed her. And that silence was louder than anything Patel could say. The air inside the studio felt different now, thick, electric, heavy with something unspoken. The usual rhythm of back and forth debate had fractured. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, as if waiting to see whether Patel could recover her footing. She shifted in her chair, flashing the kind of smile that had charmed networks and silenced weaker guests. But there was something brittle about it now. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore. The moderator's pen stopped mid-tap. The tension had shape. Patel tried again. What I'm saying is, people have to take responsibility. Crockett didn't interrupt. She let Patel dig. Let her words tangle themselves in that old, familiar rhetoric. Self-reliance, discipline, bootstrap cliches repackaged as wisdom. Patel thought she was on safe ground. She didn't notice the quiet rhythm of Crockett's breathing, the faintest nod, the gathering patience before the strike. And then it came. Crockett leaned forward just slightly, a move so subtle the camera barely caught it, but Patel did. Her sentence trailed off mid-word. The room seemed to lean with her, waiting. Crockett's voice, when it came, wasn't sharp. It was low, calm, and devastatingly clear. Ms. Patel, she began, eyes locked. When you talk about responsibility, who exactly are you talking to? It sounded simple, almost polite, but the tone, the weight of it, said everything. Patel blinked. Excuse me. Crockett didn't flinch. When you say people need to take responsibility, do you mean the single mother working 3 jobs and still choosing between rent and food? Do you mean the veteran waiting 8 months for AVA appointment? Or do you mean the corporations taking tax breaks while cutting American jobs? Each sentence hit like a slow drumbeat, measured, precise. The audience could feel the ground shifting under Patel's chair. Patel forced a laugh, that high, nervous kind that sounds like defense. You're twisting my... Crockett's gaze sharpened. No, I'm just asking which people you mean. Because it seems like the only people you hold accountable are the ones without power. Silence, a deep, cinematic silence that made even the air conditioning hum feel like part of the score. Patel tried to respond, her lips parting, but nothing came. Her practice lines evaporated. The control she always wielded, gone. The moderator leaned in slightly, as if to save her. But Crockett continued, voice steady and unhurried. See, accountability doesn't scare me. She said, I've had to look mothers in the eye when the system failed their kids. I've stood in courtrooms where people didn't have lawyers, where justice came with a price tag. That's what responsibility looks like. Showing up when it's hard, not when it's convenient. The words carried a quiet authority. They weren't sound bites. They were lived. Patel blinked rapidly, hands fidgeting under the table. The studio lights suddenly seemed bright, her makeup to heavy, her voice to far away. Crockett went on. So, when you say take responsibility, maybe start with the people who write laws that hurt families, not the ones trying to survive them. The crowd made a sound, a low exhale, a ripple of awe. It wasn't cheering yet. It was that collective oh that happens when truth finally lands. Patel tried to interject, but even her voice betrayed her now. Thinner, higher. That's a nice speech, Congresswoman. But Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. It's not a speech. It's reality. And the difference between us, Ms. Patel, is that I've lived it. The studio went still. Every eye was on her. Every camera found her face. And in that silence, Crockett did something almost unheard of in cable television. She stopped talking. She just looked at Patel, not angry, not triumphant, just steady. Patel stared back, blinking, as if waiting for her turn. But there was no turn coming. The floor was gone. In the control room, a producer whispered, "Don't cut away." Another said, "This is gold." But it wasn't spectacle. It was revelation. Because in that one moment, Crockett had done what every overtalked, underestimated woman dreams of doing. She made silence louder than interruption. And then, finally, Patel spoke. "I just think we can't keep blaming." Crockett leaned forward again, almost whispering, "No one's blaming. We're asking, why do people like you only talk about accountability when it's convenient for the powerful?" That question didn't land. It detonated. The audience gasped audibly this time. A few even clapped before remembering they weren't supposed to. Patel's mouth opened again, but nothing coherent came out. She tried to laugh it off, but even her laugh faltered halfway. Crockett didn't smile. She wasn't here to gloat. Her calm was disarming, almost unnerving. "I believe in accountability," she said softly. "That's why I show up. For the people who can't afford to be in rooms like this. For the people you talk about but never talk to." The crowd erupted then, not a wild cheer, but something deeper. Applause that carried respect, not spectacle. The kind that comes when truth cuts through the noise. Patel blinked against the glare of the lights, forcing her face into something resembling composure. She straightened in her chair, hands clasped tight. But the look in her eyes had changed. No longer predator, but prey of her own performance. The moderator tried to move things along. "Let's take a short break." But Crockett wasn't done. She looked at him, then back at Patel. "No. Let's finish this. Ms. Patel wanted accountability. Let's talk about it. It was surgical now. Controlled. She was dismantling an entire worldview. Not just an argument. You talk about hard work, Crockett said, voice steady. But hard work without fairness is just exploitation. You talk about personal choice. But how much choice does a mother have when her child's school is underfunded? You talk about freedom. But whose freedom are you defending when you silence the ones asking questions? Each line landed with mathematical precision. Each pause let the audience breathe and feel. Patel tried one last pivot, reaching for her usual line. You're making this personal. Crockett met her eyes, unwavering. It is personal. To every person who's been told their struggle is their fault. To every worker who's been blamed for wanting dignity. To every young girl watching this and thinking silence is strength. It's personal. A hush fell. The kind that stretches seconds into forever. The moderator's eyes darted toward the producer. The cue light for commercial blinked red. But no one moved. Crockett sat back slowly. You said earlier this country needs accountability, she said, her voice dropping into something almost tender. You're right. Let's start here. The camera zoomed in, instinctively, her eyes unflinching, her calm, radiant, her words, final, because real accountability isn't about punishment, she said. It's about truth. And truth doesn't need a stage, just the courage to speak when others won't. That was it. Patel's mouth opened, but before a single word could form, the director's voice cut through the control room. Fade to wide shot. Hold it. Hold it. The screen filled with both women, one composed, one crumbling. And for the first time, Patel didn't look like the expert. She looked small, surrounded by lights she couldn't control, cameras she couldn't charm, and a truth she couldn't outrun. Crockett didn't look victorious. She looked resolute, like someone who hadn't come to win an argument, but to restore balance. The host cleared his throat, forcing a transition. We'll be right back after this break. But as the broadcast faded, the last image burned into viewers' minds wasn't the logo or the sponsor. It was that moment, the question still echoing in silence. When you talk about responsibility, who exactly are you talking to? And that's how it happened. The mic drop that didn't need volume, just truth. Patel froze on live TV. Crockett didn't gloat. The internet would do that for her later. Because in a world built on noise, one woman had reminded millions of the oldest power there is: calm, unflinching truth. And as the cameras faded to black, America was still holding its breath, waiting to exhale, waiting to choose which version of accountability it would believe in next. By sunrise, the clip had already exploded. Someone on Twitter, or maybe TikTok, had captured the moment Patel froze, her expression halfway between disbelief and denial. The caption read, "When the truth hits harder than your talking points," within an hour. It had been shared 100,000 times. By noon, millions had seen it. Hashtag stacked up like aftershocks. Hashtag Patel freeze. Hashtag Crockett question. Hashtag mic drop off fire. The moment had transcended the debate itself. It wasn't just a political exchange anymore. It had become culture. Late-night hosts were the first to pounce. One joked, "Patel froze so hard the teleprompter called tech support." Another added, "You could hear her Wi-Fi disconnect when Crockett asked that question." The studio audience roared. Clips of laughter looping across social media before the show even ended. Meme accounts got to work. Patel's face beside a buffering icon, her smirk replaced with a spinning wheel. One clip played her reaction over the sound of Windows Air tones. Another showed Crockett's calm reply set to the score from Gladiator. But beneath the laughter, something deeper was happening. Activists began riposting Crockett's words. Accountability isn't just for the powerless. The phrase appeared on protest signs, Instagram captions, even printed on t-shirts within 24 hours. It wasn't just a viral moment. It was a rallying cry. Politicians weighed in next. Progressive leaders praised Crockett's composure. One wrote, "That's what real leadership looks like. Calm truth over performative noise." Another simply tweeted the quote. No context needed. Conservative figures scrambled to defend Patel. They blamed gotcha journalism, editing tricks, biased audiences, but it didn't stick. The video was live, uncut, undeniable. The internet had seen what it saw, a mask slipping in real time. News anchors dissected it frame by frame. Was this the moment Patel's credibility cracked? Asked one morning show. Another panel debated whether she'd return to TV at all. She's built her brand on dominance. One analyst noted, but what happens when dominance meets composure? In one particularly viral segment, a body language expert was brought on. They replayed the clip in slow motion, Patel's eyes darting, her fingers tightening on the desk, her throat swallowing hard. That, the expert said, is the look of cognitive dissonance meeting public accountability. The clip was replayed so often it became a kind of national loop. The freeze, the silence. The the truth, over and over again. But while Patel's team stayed silent, Crockett's response was measured and human. When reporters caught her outside her office, she didn't gloat. She smiled faintly and said, "I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. I was trying to remind people what accountability actually means." That quote went almost as viral as the confrontation itself. Because it wasn't defensive, it was anchored. Comment sections flooded with admiration. "Greater than this is what calm power looks like." She didn't yell. She didn't need to. Finally, someone said it with grace for younger audiences, especially women, immigrants, and first-generation Americans. Crockett became a symbol overnight, not of aggression, but of earned strength. The kind that doesn't shout to be heard. Clips of her old speeches resurfaced. So, did interviews where she'd spoken about growing up watching people dismissed for their accents, their backgrounds, their skin. Those moments suddenly took on new weight in classrooms. Students replayed the clip during civics discussions. Professors cited it as a modern example of rhetoric meeting moral authority. Even pastors referenced it in sermons about truth spoken without cruelty. Meanwhile, Patel's silence grew louder. Her publicist issued a short statement. "Ms. Patel looks forward to returning to discuss the issues that matter." But the tone was hollow. The audience had moved on, or worse, turned. A week later, she appeared briefly on her podcast, claiming she'd been set up. But every attempt to explain only reignited the meme cycle. The internet wasn't buying it. Once authenticity is lost, it rarely comes back. One evening show ran a montage. A timeline of media arrogance meeting moral composure. It started with anchors shouting over guests in past decades, ending with Crockett's quiet question. The host summed it up. Maybe the age of loud is over. Maybe silence is the new power. In cities across the country, street artists painted murals of Crockett's calm expression. The quote beneath it, "Who exactly are you talking to?" A moment born in confrontation had evolved into something else, reflection. People weren't just mocking Patel. They were asking themselves that same question. Because Crockett's counter wasn't about one woman freezing. It was about what America freezes on. Who gets interrupted? Who gets believed? Who's told to be accountable for things they didn't create? The freeze became metaphor, a mirror. And in that mirror, millions saw something uncomfortable. How easily truth is dismissed. Until it speaks softly enough to echo. By the end of the week, every outlet had covered it. Patel's ratings dropped. Crockett's approval surged. But numbers didn't tell the real story. The feeling did. Something in the national tone had shifted. Viewers weren't craving louder voices anymore. They were craving sincerity. And when one late-night host ended his monologue that Friday, he didn't joke. He simply said, "Greater than in a time when everyone's shouting, maybe the real revolution is listening." The audience clapped softly. No laughter, just resonance, because that week, America had witnessed something rare. A political moment that wasn't about winning, but about stillness. And the echo of that silence was still spreading. In the days that followed, something remarkable happened. What began as a clash between two women on live television grew into a meditation on what America had become and what it still could be. The Patel-Crockett exchange wasn't just a viral clip anymore. It was a mirror, a reflection of a country that had grown addicted to noise, to dominance disguised as confidence, to performance mistaken for principle. For years, politics had been theater, people shouting not to be understood, but to be heard above the rest. And then, in one quiet moment, a single question had cut through it all. When you talk about responsibility, who exactly are you talking to? That line echoed far beyond the studio walls. It wasn't an attack. It was an awakening. It reminded people what accountability should mean, not punishment, but honesty. Not blame, but courage. In that silence after the question, the country saw something rare, dignity reclaiming its place in discourse. Crockett hadn't shouted her truth. She had anchored it. She hadn't sought to humiliate Patel. She'd sought to reveal the hollowness of arrogance. The contrast between the two, Patel's performative certainty and Crockett's quiet conviction, told a story larger than either of them. It was the story of a nation deciding whether it still believed in humility as strength. For a long time, America had rewarded the loudest voices, the sharpest interruptions, the viral soundbites designed to dominate instead of dialogue. But Crockett's composure had reminded viewers of something deeply human. That real power doesn't perform, it persists. And that became the lesson people carried away. You didn't need to be in Congress to understand it. You didn't need to know policy or politics. It was the same lesson a teacher learns when standing up for a student, a nurse when defending a patient, a daughter when refusing to be spoken over. It was the universal truth that sometimes the most radical act is calm courage. Patel had been trained to win moments. Crockett came to embody meaning, That's why the clip lingered, not just because Patel froze, but because Crockett didn't flinch. In that moment, she gave voice to a quiet America that had been waiting for grace to return to strength. Across dinner tables and digital screens, people replayed that scene not for the argument, but for the posture, the patience, the proof that decency can still disarm deceit. It became less about who said what, and more about what it meant, because every generation inherits a choice to speak for applause or to speak for truth. Crockett's calm had become a kind of moral punctuation, a full stop in a sentence America had been shouting for too long. And as people shared her words, they weren't just celebrating her. They were reclaiming something of themselves: the right to pause, the right to listen, the right to be heard without echoing the very noise that drowns meaning. In that sense, the debate became more than television. It became testimony, a reminder that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just refuses to look away. Crockett didn't seek revenge. She didn't seek validation. She sought clarity, and clarity, when spoken softly enough, can echo longer than any outburst. So the story that began with a freeze ended with a thaw, not for Patel, but for the audience, for a public rediscovering the beauty of restraint, the elegance of empathy, the possibility of principle. Because the real mic drop wasn't the question itself. It was the silence that followed, the silence that said, "This is what accountability looks like." And in that silence, America was reminded of something essential. Truth doesn't need volume. It needs presence. When the shouting fades, when the lights dim, when the hashtags stop trending, what remains isn't who won the argument, but who stood with grace when it mattered. And that is where dignity lives, not in domination, not in spectacle, but in the calm conviction that doing what's right will always sound quieter and last longer. The screen fades to black and white replay. Patel's frozen stare, the stunned silence, and Jasmine Crockett's calm gaze steady under the studio lights. One moment defined the debate, and one question defined the truth. Patel came in confident, certain she could control the conversation, but arrogance is loud and dignity is patient. And when the lights hit both, America saw the difference. Crockett didn't win with volume. She won with presence. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. In that instant, she reminded millions that leadership isn't about who talks first. It's about who stands firm when the talking stops. That power doesn't come from control. It comes from clarity. This was more than politics. It was a story about how truth still finds a way to cut through noise, not by force, but by focus. Maybe that's why this clip went viral. Because deep down, people are tired of the shouting. They're waiting for something real, a kind of strength that doesn't need to perform. So as the outro music rises and the last frame lingers on Crockett's composed expression, the narrator leaves us with a challenge, not just to react, but to reflect. If you believe calm courage still matters, share this. If you think truth deserves a microphone, subscribe, because in an age of chaos and spectacle, this moment stands as proof integrity can still trend. And when the noise fades and the lights go out, it's not the shout that echoes. It's the silence of conviction, the calm that speaks louder than words. Jasmine Crockett didn't just answer a question. She reminded us why the truth still matters.